briefly go over what is the importance of pseudocoding and how we can actually translate our pseudocode into real code and help us, for example, get through a possibly stressful exam. So on this screen right now, we see a checklist of things that we should be thinking about before we're even starting the problem. So for example, what are some inputs and outputs? Is this something I should be returning or printing? What are some variables that I would be needing to maybe keep track of a running total, maybe a counter, or maybe I need a temporary variable? As you're coding and working through problems, start to build some sort of intuition for what types of problem-solving techniques might help you conquer this problem. So for example, if you're thinking, I need to iterate through this container, or I need to access an item in the list, perhaps something with indexing or using loops will be beneficial to you. This screen here is just great to have possibly on your cheat sheet, or even building your own to bring to the exams with you. Some sort of checklist would be really beneficial. So here we have this simple problem, and just reading out loud, you're given a list of test scores. Any score below 50 is considered failing and should be replaced with 0. Write a function, fix scores, that replaces failing scores with 0. And then we're going to write another function, final 2 scores, that prints the sum of the last 2 scores only. And this is just an example of how that final result should look like in accordance to the guidelines. So we have a list of integers, which is scores, and this is the output they'd like to see, which is this string. So again, when we are pseudocoding, this means we're not really writing real code. We're writing something that makes sense to us, that can be very descriptive in nature, just to get our mind thinking about the problem and how to approach it. What I like to do before writing or starting a problem is just describe what inputs and outputs we're dealing with. So for example, in this problem, I see one of the inputs we're given is a list of test scores. To keep it clear in my mind, if I ever want to reference that back again, I'm going to make sure I know that it's an integer. The output is this string statement. I'm literally just copying and pasting right from the problem. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. That's my end goal. And I see within this function itself, or the task itself, we're given 2 functions. I'm just going to take that information and create the function definitions for them, because this is simple. This is something that we're given and something that will help get our organization and flow moving. So with this, now I start the more logistical process, which is, what is that first thing that I would probably need to do to actually get this function to work? And the answer is, I would have to call it. So I'm going to just arbitrarily call fix scores, and it's going to pass in this list of scores, which is given on line 11. So now we have something functional, which is saying, okay, scores on line 23 is a list of integers. On line 24, fix scores, we're calling the function fix scores, and we're passing in an argument of scores. Now I'm going to traverse my mind to line 19, which is naturally where that function call would bring us to. What are we doing in fixed scores? On line 6, it describes that we are going to replace failing scores with a 0. And what is considered a failing score? Any score below 50. So with that, I know that I'm given a list, and if I need to figure out which values are considered a failing, I need to somehow access items in that container or that list. And in my head, my intuition is telling me, okay, that requires some sort of iteration. So I'm going to say iterate through scores. I'm going to say that's a list. When I iterate through scores, there's some sort of condition that I'm looking for. And we're going to put that into an if-else block. So if this condition is met, then we're going to replace with 0. Otherwise, we're going to continue. Just to clarify it more, what is that condition? It's when there's a score below 50. Now I'm going to walk through again. Is this right? Does this make sense? So we started at fixed scores. We're given scores, a list of integers as described in line 16. we are going to iterate through scores to find the condition where the score is less than 50 and replace that value with a 0. And otherwise, we're just going to continue. At the moment, this makes sense. So I am going to continue forward with the second function where it says we have to print the sum of the last two scores only. This question specifically is looking for us to access values from our updated list that now keeps track of any failing scores. If I want to access information from our updated list, I need to make sure that I'm returning this list. By returning scores, this gives the value of when we return the updated list. Then we can use that as a way to pass into final2 our new updated list. For clarity, looks like I mentally will need to create some sort of empty list or to store the new results that we are returning from line 19. So I'm going to call that new scores. I'm just going to call it an empty list and assign that to the return value of fixed scores. Again, with pseudocode, I'm just trying to figure out the logic and the flow of the information before getting into the nitty-gritty details. So verifying that flow once more, we're calling the function fixed scores and passing an argument of scores, iterate through the list. If the condition right here is met, we replace with 0, and otherwise we're just going to continue. And then we return scores. That scores value, or the new updated list, is now assigned to new scores, which is an empty list. I can pass as an argument new scores into final2. Here, let's say now in final2 I'm trying to figure out what to write. I'm not really sure how I want to loop through to select the last two scores yet. Maybe I need to use some list splicing or whatnot. That's where pseudocode really helps, because I really just want to get my ideas down before I get bogged down by the complexity of the problem. So here I'm just going to put loop through to select last two scores and splicing. Those are my current ideas of how I can access the last two scores only and sum them up. And then when I do that, I'm definitely going to have to create a total sum. And then what the problem says here is that I have to print the sum of the last two scores. So I'm just going to print, and this is the information that's given to me, just like that. This value looks like it'll need to be changed later based on something else that we need to create, which is going to be a total sum variable. So again, verifying the process, new scores now gets passed as an argument into final2. Final2 gets called in. Here we can see that total sum is going to help us keep track of that total sum of the last two scores. Still a little bit unsure what this value is going to be, or how we're going to work through this problem, but I'm just going to write down my ideas and keep moving forward. And this would be solid pseudocode that pretty much resembles what you're going to be doing, but also helps give the grader an opportunity to follow your code a little bit more thoroughly. And if you ever get stuck, you can go back to this and realize, okay, this is my blueprint and this is what I need to continue to do. Really pretty simple to actually code the real thing, because I have a very clear idea of what needs to be done to get from point A to point B because of how I verbally and descriptively wrote it out. So whenever I'm translating pseudocode to real code, I just like to take the main core defining pieces of my pseudocode and write them in. So I see my function definitions, adding a pass statement here just so Python doesn't yell at me for not having anything written within the functions. And then this is what I would also consider core, because it's how we're actually calling the functions and having that interaction. So I am going to start most logistically here, like with line 50, fixed scores. that's the first function that's called, and I can see again that fixed scores passes in scores, which is a list of integers. So fixed scores, according to my pseudocode, should be iterating through scores, the list, and following through with this. So I'm just literally going to follow the pseudocode here. I'm going to say, okay, so iterating through that list, I'm going to say for I in range of the length of scores, and we use a length to iterate through the entire list. So now we're doing the condition. If scores is less at I is less than 50, then scores at I is equal to 0. So that's us replacing that grade with a 0. Otherwise, in here, it's just equivalent to else. We continue. So the main thing that I also want to point out here is the importance of return. And we can show that by first commenting out line 55. So if I just had this value here, right, let's just see what this will do. I can do that by printing new scores, and this is a great debugging and coding tactic just to check your work as you go to make sure that you're actually outputting the results that you want to. So I'm going to run this and see that it's printing none. Or it's returning none into the terminal here. So whenever I see none, I'm thinking, did I return what I was supposed to return? Because by default, functions return none. So here, if I remember the flow of my code, this function final2 actually uses the values of new scores as its argument. So that means I need new scores to have the updated list from the behaviors and actions that happen in the function defined on line 41. The only way for that to happen is if I return scores, aka I'm returning that newly updated list here. So with that, now if we check print scores, we see we have our newly updated list of scores, which is perfect. So now that I know we're good here, I'm going to delete this line and we're going to uncomment this line of code and we're going to continue forward. For the moment, I'm going to collapse this so we can view final 2 and what we need to do here. So here we had total sum is equal to 0. It looks like I wrote a couple of question marks here because I wasn't exactly sure what I needed to do, but walking through that process out loud and writing it down made me realize I can use splicing to access the last 2 elements in the list, and then I can iterate through that newly spliced list to calculate my total sum. For the purposes of clarity, I'm going to make a new list called filter list and do my splicing. So it's going to be -2 to the end of the list. To clarify what that means, when we're doing lists, remember in Python, lists are 0 indexed, so 80 is really 0, and then it's 1, 2, 3, and 4. If we're moving backwards in this list, that means -3 and 4 right here is -1, and this is -2. So with that in mind, when we say -2 colon, no character after that, except the closing square bracket, that just means we're selecting -2 inclusive to the end of the list. So now I'm going to iterate through the rest of this list here, and we're going to say for the list, just going to copy and paste this, I am going to take total sum plus equal to filtered list at I. And I just want to make sure again that I'm getting the right value, so I'm just going to print total sum. Is this returning or outputting the correct value? 160, and according to the task, 160 is correct. So that's great. And I'm going to delete this. I'm going to keep going. So I luckily have this print statement right here, but don't make this mistake, right? We have an incomplete f string. This 160 changes in response to our list, which might not always be what's given on line 58. So we want to make sure that we're putting curly brackets around the variable within our f string to mark that it is a variable. And our variable here is total sum, because that defines the final two scores, the sum of the final two scores. So if we just run this code, we see that is what we are supposed to be outputting. And just verifying, are we supposed to be returning anything? We can look back here. It asks us to print the sum of the last two scores. So this is the final answer.